And on to the big story that we're tracking for you, and that comes from the Pacific Islands. Well, a tsunami warning have been issued across the Pacific on Wednesday morning after a powerful earthquake of 8.8 magnitude struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. Now, videos have emerged from this region showing violent shaking inside buildings, with damage reported at multiple places. In one video, furniture inside a residential apartment can be seen shaking violently as the earthquake struck the region. Kamchatka and Russia's Far East sit on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is a geologically active region that is prone to major earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Now, earlier in the month of July, the region was rattled by 5 major earthquakes, the largest being a 7.4 magnitude quake. Now, this recent quake this morning prompted urgent alerts for coastal regions in Japan, Russia and the US, including Hawaii. Meanwhile, Japan's meteorological agency upgraded its advisory to a full tsunami alert, warning of waves up to 3 meters. The US National Weather Service also warned that Hawaii's coastlines could see damaging waves imminently. The latest event echoes the historic 1952 Kamchatka quake, where registered a magnitude of 9 and generated a 30-foot, that's a 9.1 meter wave in Hawaii, causing widespread damage but no reported deaths. Meanwhile, let's look at these visuals on your screen from Hokkaido in Japan. The Japan Meteorological Agency said a first wave of tsunami of about 30 centimeters has reached the Nemuro on the eastern coast of Hokkaido. Damage and evacuations were reported in the Russian regions nearest to the earthquake's epicenter on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Now, the first tsunami wave hit the coastal area of Servo-Kulisk, the main settlement on Russian Kuril Islands in the Pacific. This according to the local governor. He said residents were safe and staying on high ground until the threat of a repeat wave is gone. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center said that waves of 1 to 3 meters above tidal level were possible along some coastal areas of Hawaii, Chile, Japan, and the Solomon Islands. Waves of more than 3 meters were possible along some coastal areas of Russia as well as Ecuador. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center said a tsunami had been generated by the quake that could cause damage along the coastlines of all the Hawaiian islands. Urgent action should be taken to protect lives and property. As per the warning, the first waves were expected around 7 p.m. local time. A.m. Japan time had a preliminary magnitude of 8.0. Japan and U.S. seismologists said the U.S. Geological Survey later updated its measurement to 8.8 magnitude, and the USGC said that the quake occurred at a depth of 20.7 kilometers. Let's cut back to the visuals that came from inside, where cabinets toppled inside homes, mirrors were broken, cars swayed in the street, and balconies on buildings shook noticeably. The TASS also reported power outages and mobile phone services have failed in the region. We have a set of very special guests joining us this morning. R. Sridharan, Editor International at TV9 Network. We also have Mitali Nikore, an economist who tracks this region very closely. Sri, let me start by asking you first. We are hearing reports that this seems to be the biggest quake to hit the Kuril Islands in Russia after 1952. I'm not sure too many of our viewers were around to see the impact of that, but a tsunami is very closely reminiscent of what we saw here back in India in the year 2004. How devastating do you think this impact can be this time around?
So, Karthik, the first thing our viewers need to know is that, as you mentioned, this Kamchatka Peninsula is known as the Ring of Fire because that's where the Pacific and the North American tectonic plates meet. So this makes the Kuril Kamchatka subduction zone very, very active in terms of earthquakes. In fact, there are 127 volcanic sites in this region, out of which 22 are currently active as we speak. And because of the way the plates are structured in this region, Karthik, what happens is even an earthquake, which is, let's say, not 8.8, maybe even 6.5 or 7, what it does is because of the nature of the plates, the vertical lift that the water in this area gets, it causes tsunamis which can travel to thousands of kilometers. And it's happened repeatedly in this particular region. And, so that's why we, hear that Hawaii is like preparing for the tsunami, and U.S. Pacific coast is also gearing up to protect itself from these waters. But the latest that's coming in on this tsunami, Karthik, because we are also watching what the Tsunami Watch Center and the other experts are saying. So the expectation is that the waves are, for example, first of all, Japan is not going to be in the direction of the waves, because it's now going to be other areas in the Pacific region and not so much Japan, which is going to be impacted by the tsunami. So that's one good news for Japan. While they will still experience tsunami, it may not be as serious or severe as they had first anticipated. So that's good news. And secondly, since the overall height of the waves itself is like coming down, experts think that it may not be as severe as they had first anticipated when the news of the earthquake, first broke. So I think this is not going to be a very big, issue, for the people. Also, because of the fact that the Kamchatka Peninsula itself is very sparsely populated, while routinely the infrastructure here gets damaged, we don't have lives getting lost because of tsunami. You talked about the 1952 magnitude, 9 magnitude, which is the severest on record. Even that didn't really kill people. It damaged infrastructure severely, and the impact was felt as far as Hawaii. But lives were not lost. So hopefully this time, Karthik, no lives will be lost. Infrastructure damage along the coast, and cities and ports which are on the coastal areas, they will be affected, but hopefully no lives will be lost, Karthik.
Right. Thank you for that update, Shri. Do stay with us. Mithali Nikore, jump in here and just help us understand, while Shri is saying that what he's picking up, the latest is that perhaps the tsunami impact is not going to be that damaging on Japan, but Japan itself has been mired with economic headwinds, and a tsunami of economic headwinds, if one can call it that, this morning. But I want to specifically come to the Hokkaido region. And from what we are hearing right now is that Hokkaido region is typically one of the hubs of manufacturing and is home to companies like the Toyota Motor Hokkaido. It's also home to the Isuzu engine manufacturing, and also the new semiconductor plant in Chitose called Rapidus is coming up in that region. Well, if there is going to be no loss of life, that is great news. But as far as infrastructure is concerned, any damage to these three plants could potentially have an impact on the Japanese economy. And before you answer that, also for our viewers who are following us this morning, the tsunami of headwinds that I was talking about come from the fact that Japan's economy has been struggling with high inflation as well as the double impact of global slowdown. Add to that, the real GDP of the country has fallen 0.2% between the fourth quarter of 24 and the first quarter of this year. More than that, the impact on net exports has also been fairly dampening for the Japanese economy. And imports have rebounded this year. But then that, of course, with low exports and higher imports is going to offset the trade balance. Inflation is also likely to be sticky, and the US 15% tariffs on Japan are not going to hold good stead for the investors in Japan. And investors in Japan, in any case, have not seen much gains all of last year. The Nikkei 225 was pretty much flat through the whole year. And then there's also political uncertainty where the Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is facing resignation calls. So pretty much a tsunami of headwinds for Japan and Hokkaido, which happens to be one of the bases for the country. How severe do you think is this going to be for the economy of Japan and therefore the entire region?
So I think, Karthik, it is a matter of how quickly or how slowly this entire tsunami will settle. So at the end of the day, firstly, as as your editor just pointed out, it's not expected to now come towards the Japanese coast that quickly. And even if it comes, it might come in the form of lower length waves or lower height waves and actually not take the form of a full tsunami. So in that situation, of course, Japan is sort of safer, and it doesn't see that much of an impact of the direct tsunami coming in. Now, as far as these three plants are concerned, the location and infrastructure of these three plants has actually been designed. I haven't been there, but actually, I have a friend who has a lot of experience in the auto sector and has been visiting these plants. He has mentioned to me that the infrastructure of these facilities involves high walls, and it involves very climate resilient infrastructure because it is well known that there could be tsunamis that come through. It is well known that this is a region that is climate sensitive, and therefore it has already been taken into account at the time of construction for this particular plant, that it is possible that there will be a climate disaster at least till a certain height of the tsunami waves. You do have walls around a lot of these facilities, so that itself will keep some of this critical infrastructure, particularly the manufacturing infrastructure, safe. And I think thirdly, just discussing the Japanese economy a little bit more generally, I think that, one of the ways that Japan safeguards its economic security, which we haven't always, which is never really in the limelight, is through infrastructure investments in other countries. And the Japanese International Cooperation Agency has a very massive budget, which it is using to invest in infrastructure across different countries, including India. We know that the high speed railway between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, for example, in India is funded by the Japanese. So, because of this, they get returns on these investments and they're able to sort of create a new revenue stream, which is not even related to their domestic economy. So, I feel like, countries like Japan, where there's been a movement and calibrated movement towards diversifying the country's income sources, moving away from traditional income sources, and really leveraging the country's excess capital. Because for almost a decade, Japan had a very high liquidity and a lot of excess capital, and it has deployed that in investments around the world.
All right, Mitali. Well, for our viewers, let's also bring a geographical context to where we are seeing these impacts of the earthquake, the jolts of the earthquake, the magnitude, as well as the tsunami really emerging from. Let's first pull up the Kuril Islands in Russia on a map that we've drawn up here for you. And these are the Kuril. So this is pretty much Russia. And within Russia, the Kuril Islands is this entire chain of islands. Now, the epicenter for this particular earthquake happens to be the Kamchatka Peninsula, and that is right here. So when you look at India, India being somewhere here on the map, moving towards Russia, this is the northeastern part of Russia. The Kamchatka Islands are right here, and this is the epicenter of the earthquake, 8.8 on the Richter scale. And then southwest is this entire little islands, not inhabited by too many people. These little islands form what are called the Kuril Islands, which are an integral part of marine life for Russia. And these islands are, the tip of these islands is pretty much just a stone's throw distance away from Hokkaido Islands in Japan. So this is Hokkaido. Hokkaido, like we have been talking, is the home to companies like Toyota as well as some engines by Isuzu. So Hokkaido, not too far, in fact, just about 100 nautical miles or so from the southernmost tip of the Kuril Islands, which have been impacted by this massive quake. Remember, Kamchatka happens to be the epicenter, and the tsunami waves have flown all through this entire region, right up to Hokkaido, where tsunami has, the tremors of tsunami have been felt. Well, we don't know exactly the extent of loss to property and infrastructure at the moment, but like Mitali was saying, that there are high walls, and 3 meters may not be a big enough dent to cause a massive rout on companies and their operational abilities. Let's also look at all the other areas where warning signs have been rung and these alarms have rung. In fact, like Shri was telling us some time back, now the Hokkaido region, which is then going to lead to Japan and the central parts of Japan, may not be impacted, but the wave is likely to spread in the other direction. And when it spreads in the other direction, remember the earth is round. So what you're seeing on the left hand side of the screen is actually going to connect this side. So what we are seeing is if the wave moves to the opposite direction, then as far as New Zealand in the southern peninsula of the Pacific is likely to be impacted, and on the other side, which is the west coast of US and all the way down to South America, these are the regions where alarm bells have been rung, all the way from the Honolulu Islands, which are somewhere in between the US west coast and the Japanese east coast. Honolulu, there have been tsunami warnings that have been rung, down to Hawaii Islands, and then all the way up to Alaska. So if you were to connect this end of the earth with this end of the earth, Hokkaido and the Kuril Islands and Kamchatka are in fact quite close to Alaska here in North America. So overall, if the waves are moving in the other direction, if from our standpoint of the world, if the waves are moving in the eastern direction, then in the eastern direction, they are likely to impact these regions as well. Let me bring in Shri back into this conversation. Shri, help us understand the significance of Alaska, the significance of Honolulu and Hawaii. Now, these are, of course, barring Alaska, which is part of mainland USA. You also have these islands in Hawaii and Honolulu, which are strategic locations for the US. What does this really mean for global trade, global peace, and overall geopolitics?
So since these all these locations that you talked about are fairly far away, Karthik, and if the experts are right and the waves are reducing in their strength, then I think we don't have too much to worry about. I don't think there's going to be any significant damage to, let's say, any of the assets that the US may have, either in Alaska or Hawaii or any other islands which are there, which are part of the US sovereign territory. So I think it remains to be seen how do the waves carry forward as they radiate towards in the westerly direction towards the North American Pacific. What really happens there? But the current assessment is that it may not be as bad as it was initially thought. It's unlikely that it'll pick up, let's say, some sort of momentum on the way to the west, unless there is an aftershock which is even more powerful than what we got just now in the morning, which is 8.8, which is very, very powerful. So unless an untoward incident or unexpected incident like that happens, I guess the waves should not do much damage to the US Pacific and the Honolulu, Hawaii, and the Alaska region, Karthik. That's my assessment. That's my reading, looking at what the experts are saying at this point.
Right. Thanks for that reading, Shri. And of course, everybody can do with a little bit of optimism this morning. And let's hope that the experts are right and the impact to life, to property, to infrastructure is not something which is going to rock the living conditions. Meanwhile, we also have Vibha Dhawan, Director General of TERI, joining us this morning. Ms. Dhawan, good morning. And thank you for your time early morning this Wednesday. Just help us understand what is really going on, because one seems to understand that the movement of the tectonic plates has got little when it comes to being able to predict them. And also, is this at any level connected to the overall climate change crisis that the world is facing?
See, really speaking, I'll say more than climate change, the use of bombs and entire thing in the region, perhaps that also has indirect impact. When we talk of climate change, we are talking of gradual increase in greenhouse gas emissions. But what is happening in the region is that blasting happening many a times and so on. So therefore, indirectly, it could have an impact, but really speaking, we don't have experimental proof to that. Tectonic plates, as it is something which is happening all the time, because what has happened can happen, and it is happening that way. One thing which we must realize, and that is what has happened in one region can have impact in far off places, and that's what we are talking about climate change. Why we should be conscious of the entire globe, that emissions are reduced in every country, and it is not one part of the world.
Right.
And that is where the partnerships in terms of or investments in climate change becomes extremely important, because otherwise any disaster in one region will perhaps have rippling effect in rest of the world as well.
Right, but ma'am, I mean, despite all the arguments for or against climate change, depending on what political ideology one follows in the world, especially in the Western world, but this entire science behind seismology and being able to predict and being able to forewarn people when it comes to such events like earthquakes as well as tsunamis. Is there more development, more advancement that you're seeing, especially with the advent of AI now? Are we seeing some work in terms of being able to predict a little more surely on when a tectonic plate is likely to collide with another and cause a massive earthquake like the one we are just seeing and reporting from Russia?
Well, as the science is developing, so are the early warning signals. You cannot stop it, but you can warn people. So, therefore, you cannot save your property, but you can save the human resource. And in years to come, because that is becoming a very important science where you should be making investments, where your nuclear power plant should be, where your major infrastructure, like today, what we are hearing about Toyota, and so that kind of infrastructure should not be put in the regions where there can be impact of tsunami or more prone to earthquakes and so on. So that is now becoming a reality, and that is what when you are talking of the modeling part of it, you are trying to also have, I should say, the bank's involvement, where they should give loans, because their investment should also be more secure, and so is that of the companies.
Right. Well, Mithali Nikore, let me bring you back into this conversation. And I think it's these events and news items like these pretty much, get the whole world to wake up and take notice of how prepared they themselves are. Now, of course, Japan has been absolutely at the center of seismic activity, and the country, the economy is pretty well geared up to be able to deal with disasters like these, or disasters in the making, so to speak. From a pure economics perspective, from a pure cost of reducing the cost of damage, what are the lessons that India's disaster agencies and overall the entire world, including developing economies, should learn?
No, absolutely, Karthik. I completely agree with the, with ma'am here that at the end of the day, future investments when we are planning. I mean, obviously these investments were planned in another era. They were set up maybe almost 20 years ago. At that time, we weren't doing this much of climate modeling when it came to, economic cost benefit analysis. Today, we do this climate modeling almost as a basic requirement when we are appraising any project for investments. And at the end of the day, I really advocate that it is very important that even if one is placing some infrastructure in a zone which is, say, a zone 4 or zone 3, not a zone 5, in that situation, we need to actually build for climate resilient elements. But in some investments and in some regions, even in regions which are, say, not threatened or completely, which are interior regions, which are not on the coast, even on those regions, you have other climatic threats. For example, if we are investing in Mumbai, we may think about, a tsunami, or we may think about flooding, or we may think about, the impact of what happens when your sea levels start rising, right? But when you're investing in a place like Nagpur, you have a completely different set of considerations, like, for example, extreme heat and how that extreme heat is going to impact the people who are going to come and live there or work there. Because if you set up a factory, it has to be covered.
Right.
It cannot be a situation that people are working outdoors. So I think climate resilient elements are very critical when we are planning new investments going forward for any economy.
So, Vibha Dhawan, let me bring you in. Very valid points being raised here by Mithali Nikore. are Indian companies, are Indian infrastructure giants and our civil agencies really looking at climate resilient infrastructure, given the fact that climate and climate related disasters could come knocking at any moment? Are we really, because every time there's a rain, we see a traffic jam. Every time there's a heavier rain, you see a roof of an airport collapse. Are Indian companies, especially the infrastructure companies, really seriously talking about climate resilient infrastructure?
Yeah, over years now it is becoming more and more common, because earlier it was more of where the land is available. But today we are looking at all these factors, like how prone the area is to earthquake. We are also looking at the climate modeling part of it, because what are the temperatures going to be? What are we expecting in terms of extremes of temperature or rains or even drought? Because ultimately it is not just putting infrastructure, it is you have to use that infrastructure. And we are really worried in terms of especially the heat waves and the temperatures going up, because we all are aware that with temperature the productivity comes down. And that is where one is looking both in terms of the heat of the region and climate action plan. That is what the states are also making. And we are looking at the cooling action plan, which is becoming extremely common now. And the government is paying a lot of emphasis on that. And in years to come, you'll see that even our building designs are going to be very different from what they are today, because today it's all glass, but in years to come, it will be more of the local material, which is more suitable for temperatures in that region. We are also looking at other structures like sunshades, which were earlier very prevalent, but now to use every square inch of space, we have done away with it. But they again are very important. We are looking at living labs, because what works, what doesn't work. So we should have that history also with us.
Right.
So the infrastructure, we are very fortunate because we are still saying 70% of the infrastructure is yet to be built in this country. And that infrastructure will be more green, more towards taking all these calamities or taking care of that it may happen, and what is it, what it should able to take that burden or risk. So one is doing that risk assessment as well as preparedness for it, so which is good, and it's done both at the center level and at the state level.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much for that input. Well, let's hope that the 70% balance of infrastructure which is yet to be built is going to be unlike what we've seen in cities like Bengaluru, Gurgaon, as well as Mumbai. And these are cities, Sri, that you frequent more than perhaps anybody else in News 9 at least. So are you seeing any action on ground when it comes to Gurugram, when it comes to the absolutely sorry state of affairs in Mumbai as well as Bengaluru?
I think you touched a raw nerve.
I'm so sorry.
This, I think, is our biggest challenge as a country that aspires to be a developed world, developed nation. Unfortunately, we don't have a single major metropolitan city that you can truly say is world class and which gives its people the kind of quality of life that they truly deserve. One of the reasons why real estate prices in metro cities, in select pockets, are insanely priced is because the availability of quality infrastructure and infrastructure, including roads, water, safety, power, everything is so limited that a small number of assets get bid up insanely. As you know, in Bombay, more than 50% of the population lives in slums. So I think India has a huge, challenge in terms of turning its cities into modern, livable, progressive cities,
Right.
where kids can go out. They have, parks to play in, where you and I, as individuals, can go out for a stroll. There is clean waterway. There are safe roads. So there's a lot of work to be done. And unfortunately, Karthik, today I don't think we have a single city in India, maybe except for smaller cities like maybe like Mysore, Chandigarh, where there is some semblance of quality of life. But I think our metros are struggling with the number of people we have, the traffic on the road, the infrastructure is creaking, the cities, it's really
Yeah.
bursting at the seams. So we have a long way to go in terms of building global cities, Karthik.
Long way to go, but hopefully lessons to be learned, especially with news of such disasters striking, including neighboring countries not too far away like Japan, as well as the northern parts, the northeastern parts of Russia. Sridharan, thank you so much for your inputs. Vibha Dhawan, Mitali Nikore, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.